Coming at you live from New York. This is Spirit Matters. Welcome. Good morning. Thank you for being here. My name is Dal Grunga, and I'm here with the Chutagopi, Kishore Chandra, our live Zoom studio audience, and you, wherever you're tuning in from. You're part of this family, and we are here to remind ourselves that we are not alone, that we are on a journey together, and that spirit matters. That's the whole point. Spirit matters. Spirituality matters, and we can't do it alone. We cannot do it alone. We need each other. So we're here to share some spiritual. We generally read from the Bhagavad Gita. We have your daily reading from the Bhagavad Gita, as well as just your personal check-in. Like, is everyone okay? Everyone alive? Everyone still here? Chuta, Kishore, how you guys doing?
I'm great now that you dropped that. I don't know if that's our new tagline, saying that every morning, but it was epic. I just imagined like a whole gang of devotees being like, what? Spirit matters.
Spirit matters.
Spirit
Boom.
matters. Boom. So I'm good. With that, I'm good.
Kishore's pumped up.
I'm good. I'm alive. I'm still here.
She's live, still here. Good. We're here. All right. Any updates, or should we just dive into El Bhagavad Gita?
El Bhagavad Gita. Let's dive in.
All right. Where did we leave off yesterday, Chuta?
We did 265 and 266.
265 and 266. And now we're in, that leaves us at 267. Getting to the end of chapter 2. All right. Kishore, you want to read for us since we missed you yesterday?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just get the translation. I was reading from a different book, and I have like
Kishore was reading Eat, Pray, Love. He's gonna switch over back to Bhagavad Gita.
No, I was reading a different Bhagavad Gita translation, so I want to read Srila Prabhupada's translation. I was reading a different. Okay, so it says, verse 67 of chapter 2, as a strong wind sweeps away a boat on the water, even one of the roaming senses on which the mind focuses can carry away a person's intelligence.
There are great. Why don't I not be the first person to speak?
Well, I was going to
say that's my new tagline, even though I just interrupted you and now I'm speaking. But it's like maybe somebody else should speak.
Well, I was just going to say there's a very small purport that I think just drives the point home. It's like 2 sentences, so I'll just read it. It says, Srila Prabhupada says, unless all of the senses are engaged in the service of the Lord, even one of them engaged in sense gratification can deviate the devotee from the path of transcendental advancement. As mentioned in the life of Maharaj Ambarish, all of the senses must be engaged in Krishna consciousness, for that is the correct technique for controlling the mind.
Were you gonna say something about that, or you just wanted to read it, put it out there? And
just wanted to read it, put it out there. I want to hear what Achyuta has to say.
Chuta, we want to hear what you have to say. That's why you're on this podcast.
I was just kind of looking at that one text, and I feel like it's always been a bit of like a mammoth task. It's a very, very tall order. And I think it's okay to recognize that you can't fill that order all at once. Because then that gets into, it's like, but what is sense gratification, and then what's not? There are some things that are so overt that it's fine, you know? And then there are so many subtleties. So I think it's such a tall order, and I think it's important for us to remember that we are talking about a person who is firmly fixed and established in their spiritual maturity. And that it's okay if we are still spiritually immature in some ways. That's why we're here. It's a process.
I I was just relating this to, I've been thinking a lot about habits recently. I bought that book, Atomic Habits. It was a gift. Somebody was like, hey, I think you need to work on this. And just thinking about how much what I read from this very much is the idea of the habits that we build and how the habits. What was that quote from Gandhi? Was it Gandhi or somebody that beware of your thoughts because they become words and your words become actions and your habits create. Beware of your thoughts become words and your words become actions and your actions become habits and your habits create your character and your character creates your destiny, something like that. And so I think that what I'm hearing here is that as a strong wind sweeps away a boat in the water, this boat just gets carried away. Even one of the roaming senses on which the mind focuses on. So taking this into the context of the previous verses that we read, right? Go a few verses back of that. When you contemplate something, you develop attachment for it. And from that attachment comes like this lust or this avarice, which leads to anger and bewilderment and losing of our intelligence just by a little like contemplation that lead to meditation, that lead to like an attachment and an obsession. And so I think that it's just mentioning in spiritual life is a very intentional process. And I think if I were to sum up spiritual life in a very, very simple way, it's just learning to be a lot more intentional about what I do and why. And there's a lot of things in my life that I do just because, either because that's just what people do, or that's just what I feel like in the moment. But I think it's really a process of just becoming very intentional about what I do and why, and just questioning my daily choices. Like why am I eating this? Why am I watching this? Why am I reading or not reading that? Or why am I following that? Why am I scrolling this? And just paying attention to the effect that it has on my consciousness. And I think that's what I'm getting away mostly from this place, this section of the Bhagavad Gita is just a reminder to just be more intentional. It's easy to not be so intentional when the world is constantly throwing things at me.
I think that's a really nice takeaway for this from this section of Bhagavad Gita of just being more intentional. I also really appreciated Achyuta's point that this is a description of the person who is firmly fixed in transcendence in Krishna consciousness. And I think that sometimes when you read verses from Bhagavad Gita outside of context, it can be like, a lot of yoga teachers do that. They'll just be like, I'm just picking a verse from Bhagavad Gita and this is what it says, and that can be simultaneously cool, but also not cool in the sense of like you read something like this and you're like, oh my God, like just one moment and I mess up on a habit that I was trying to form and it's over, And I think sometimes in general, in spiritual practices, where there is a sense of morality, and I'm putting it in quotes on purpose, a sense of morality of like what's good and what's bad and what's this and what's that. It can, that's a whole can of worms, and different people have different, let's say, impressions or samskaras around like being told what's good and what's bad, or how you're supposed to act or how you're not supposed to act. And so I think that, I guess what I'm taking away from this is that, yes, there's definitely like, habits that we want to uphold and try and do. And at the same time, this is in the context of the greater Bhagavad Gita, which we're still in chapter 2. And Krishna later in Bhagavad Gita kind of talks a lot about his sweet spot in his heart for his devotees. And I think that that's just something really important to remember, that it's like, yeah, there's kind of like this this marker of what it looks like, and at the same time, like Achyuta was saying, it's like that's a lifelong process. I might not be there, and even Arjuna later in the Gita will be like, this is hard and I can't do this, and therefore Krishna gives different kind of approaches to how to come close to him. So I'm just thinking of Krishna's sweetness here, because sometimes when you read these verses, I'll end with this, it can feel a little intense. It's like, oh my God, this person in transcendence is like this and like this and like this and like this. And that
Mm,
means I have to be like this and like this and like this and like this. And it can get a little like, oof.
mm,
I was trying to think about where that intimidating feeling comes from, and I think it there's a large part of us putting consequences on things that Krishna never put there. Because if we look at the consequences, we will decide. It's like we'll decide, like we'll quote the first half, and then we'll decide, like, and then that makes me a bad person, and then I'm probably going to hell, and then all these things. And I'm like, actually, it just says it makes it a more difficult situation for you. You make yourself a more difficult situation for you. Like, I
mm,
like the fact that this verse technically has nothing to do with the Supreme Person. There is no mention that the Supreme Person is going to put this judgment on you, or is going to shame you, or guilt you, or condemn you for life. It actually has nothing to do with the Supreme Person and everything to do with our rehabilitation process and whether or not our minds will start to make it more difficult for us. And basically, this is coming about because Arjuna's sitting there going, I'm depressed and having a panic attack. And he's like, yeah, well, if you continue to identify with all of these things, those panic attacks will become more frequent. He's basically just giving us a way not to throw ourselves further into mental anguish, which we then take to further throw ourselves into mental anguish.
mm, mm. Can I ask a personal question? This is for the table. Is there places where you find this happening in your own life?
Are there?
The mind getting swept away because allowing something to get a little. Where does this show up for you? That's
Yeah,
my
you got to
question.
answer that first.
I'm not saying that what are we going to draw straws here?
No, we already drew the straws. It's you.
Okay, I don't remember drawing a straw. Um, I was for me, it really shows up. I was having for me, it really shows. I mean, it's two things. It's one. It's these things. I think it's our phones and it's technology. I think more than anything, is where it's the easiest to get swept. I used to have before I had my other phone, and on the back of it, I had a wooden case that had an engraving on it. It was the verse from Bhagavad Gita: "Always absorb your mind in thinking of me, um, become my devotee, etc." Um, and it was a reminder for me of like allow myself to be absorbed regularly. So like when I go to reach for my phone, like why am I reaching for my phone? Um, and as opposed to like just I'm not reaching. I'm not. There's no reason why I'm reaching for my phone. I'm just reaching for it. I'm just going to see what pops up. And then I think that it's so easy for us to get our mind taken away down a path towards distraction. And so I think for me, it comes up in two places. One is it comes up in just like the way that we spend time on our devices. And it's also easy for me to show up in the in the morning times when you just wake up. You ever have this experience where you wake up and your mind, like you have those moments of like what like ever notice like where your mind is right when you wake up? It's almost like you don't get to choose that. Your mind's just in a particular place. And it's like, am I going to follow that train of thought? Because sometimes you wake up and it's like, I'm ready to go. And sometimes you just wake up like, why am I in anxiety? What's going on, you know? And I think that the mind can really be very overwhelming at times when you wake up in those morning seconds. And it's like, okay, am I going to follow this train of thought of my mind down a rabbit hole? Am I going to reel it back in and allow myself to kind of, you know, and then essentially you can do things that just you can pull the covers back over, you go to bed, wake up, wash your face, do something to kind of like I find myself that once I get going in the day, it allows me to like once I get that initial inertia overcome, then I kind of like get myself into gear. So those are just some times that I feel this coming alive and where I always got to keep my finger on the pulse and be watching. Always got to be watching.
I have one more question.
Ooh, okay. Well, Neither of you have answered the first question yet, but sure.
I will, I will. And part of it is like my answer, my thought process on it. So was this not a problem before devices?
I think that it was definitely probably a problem, but it now has a venue to become much of a bigger problem.
Because I think for me, it's like when people ask the question, how can I become more humble? And I'm a little bit of a cynical New Yorker. And whenever I hear that question, I'm like, don't ask that question. You know what you're supposed to do. You know.
Hmm.
And so with me, I'm like that also with myself. I'm like, I know. I know it was a problem before my devices were here.
Hmm.
Because 5,000 years ago in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is speaking about this. And this is an issue
Hmm.
for people,
Hmm.
for embodied souls. And this is before iPads and iPhones. And so I think that I've started to look for the reason behind it. Like, what am I escaping? And sometimes, some days, it's easy. Some days I wake up knowing, all right, I'm scrolling through this day because I just don't feel like being here. And this is pretty much getting me through that. And so it's the difference between knowing you're numbing it
Hmm.
or pretending not to know that we're numbing it. But we know
Hmm.
we're numbing something. And so I think some of this verse is Krishna going, don't just numb your way through life.
Hmm.
And he's not speaking to a person who's never been through hard times. He's got it. He knows Arjuna is tired and worn out and worn down and heartsick and all of these things. And there's so much, and that's kind of what I feel like when he speaks about happiness and distress and tolerating. Sometimes it just means, but don't numb it. Be present through both, which is one of the hardest lessons, um, even for me, because sometimes you feel like the only way I'm going to make it through this is just to numb my way through. I've got to numb it, and we
Hmm.
and we know we're doing it, and so we reach for our phones. It's not mindless. It is mindful, just maybe not in the healthiest of ways, but we're reaching for it intentionally. Because if we didn't know, we'd be like, oh, and then you put the phone down. We follow
Hmm.
through with the actions. We back it up, and so there are some days where I know I'm like, I didn't want to do this. I don't want to do this today. It's like, do what? All of this, the whole life thing. Can't I just not do the life every day? Must I? Um, and so those are the rabbit holes that my mind kind of pulls me through. But deep down, I know, because my mind is one thing, but my intelligence, my consciousness is another.
Hmm.
And growing up, that was always difficult for me to understand. Shri Krishna will speak about the senses being horses and the mind being like an errant, you got this chariot driver and all this stuff, but then you've got an intelligence who should be, you've got your consciousness, your intelligence, which should be driving the chariot, but is not, because now it's being forcefully led away by the mind. And I was like, what? I don't get it.
Hmm.
But I do. Because it's not always mindless. Sometimes our intelligence, we're hiding and thinking, hoping against hope that it'll protect us from whatever it is we really can't deal with. Um, and instead, maybe we don't try to shoulder all that alone. So we keep trying to pick up other ways to, oh, look at somebody else's life. It's not as bad. Let me connect with somebody else's life. It's not as bad. Let me connect with somebody else through a video. It's not as bad. Maybe we should stop trying to shoulder all this ourselves and connect with each other. Maybe sometimes behind screens, maybe not.
Hmm. Mm.
I was going to I agree with Achuta's point around like these kinds of things always existing before phones in Krishna's time. And I was just going to speak kind of to what Pasha said really quickly, because for me, that's what I have really let my mind get swept away with. She wrote, for me, it's hard to not get swept away with injustice. When people are continually oppressed or harmed in spaces that are supposed to be safe, it makes me really upset. And sometimes it's hard to get out of that space. And I wanted to speak on that a little bit because at least for me, like my personal journey around that is I've always like taken a step back to be like, wait a minute, what am I thinking here? Like, what do I believe is right and what do I believe is wrong? And where do those beliefs come from? And do I think that I can fix it? And now I'm gonna go do it, you know? And I was raised in very much a way of like, this is what is right and this is what is wrong.
Mm.
And, you know, I remember working in, Pasha and I have spoken about this, working in social services or social work or social justice. And I remember even when I did my master's degree, it was very much about like fixing the world's problems, you know, and like, just like fixing things. And that really, you know, from a macro perspective in terms of like fixing the world's problems to even in my own personal perspective, like I notice how much with people that are a little bit closer to me, I'll be pointing out problems. I'll be like, this is not right. You need to do this better. This is this, this is that, da, da, da. And it kind of, you know, I realize like it kind of gets me into trouble a little bit because it's like, how do I know what's wrong for that person? How do I know what's wrong for that society? How do I know what's right for this or for that? It's like, the question I keep on coming back to is like, who am I to know like what is right and what is wrong? I remember we were in India with a Chuta, and this was a question that came up. It's like, you know, we're Americans, you know, going to India with our American sensibilities of like how things should be. And it's like anytime you're traveling to a different country and specifically like a different culture and such a different culture, you know, you see things and it's like they're doing it in a way that's like not only totally different to the way that you're doing it, but in your mind, immediately this alarm goes off of like, that's wrong, you know, that's wrong, that's incorrect, that's not how it should be done. It's unjust, it's this, it's etc. And it's like, I've had to deal with that a lot in my life of just like with travel, with people, with stuff like that, of like, let me like pause for a moment and see like where this is coming from. And is this actually like real? And what does Krishna say about this? And what does like the Gita say about this? Because it's gotten me personally into a lot of trouble in the past, like
Mm.
trying to fix things or fix people so much. And then I realized like, actually, I can't fix it. And I've just been distracting myself with trying to fix others and society. And then I'm left with myself and my stuff. And it's like, uh-oh, now I have to look at me. It's like, no, wait. I have another thing to fix. Okay, let me go fix that thing, you know?
Mm.
And so it's been a very interesting process that sweeps me away a lot. But I still don't have you know, just to end with Pasha's point, it is very hard. It's hard. It's extremely hard to get out of that space of and I was in a class this morning. I'll say this last thing. I was in a class this morning and they were talking about the teacher was talking about the seventh canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, Prahlad Maharaj. I won't get too much into it, but essentially this teaching of understanding, and this teaching comes in Bhagavad Gita as well, of understanding that Krishna is in the heart of each and every person, and therefore we should be treating each and every person like Krishna is in their heart.
Mm.
And so someone asked the presenter, like, okay, I get that theoretically, but like on a lived reality, like practical reality level, like what does that look like? And the presenter very real and humbly was like, let me get back to you on that because I don't really know what that looks like yet. I'm still trying to figure that out, what that looks like yet. So it's a work in progress. And I think being okay with the fact that it's a work in progress is important.
Works in progress. I love what's going on here, the idea. And I think that sometimes it's almost like it becomes the longer you spend avoiding something, the harder it becomes to stop avoiding it, because it's built up so much more over time. And so, the longer I allow myself to get distracted, the longer I allow myself to numb myself from wherever it feels uncomfortable, then the harder it becomes, because it's so much more. It's like accumulating and building up. It's like not checking your inbox. And like, I don't want to check my inbox because there's just so much going on in there. But then the longer you wait to check it, it just accumulates and accumulates, and more and more and more and more stuff is coming in. So
And I think that we have an idea that once I stop and I'm facing all of the things that are bothering me, I'm never going to make it out of there. Like, but that doesn't have to be. Once again, we are putting like doomsday consequences on some things that were not said to have doomsday consequences. I think that we're often raised to believe that certain things are like the end of the world. And if you don't do this, it really will be the end of the world. And funny enough, that's not what Krishna says about any of this stuff in the Bhagavad Gita. Even if Arjuna left the battlefield, it's not going to be the end of the world. It's not even going to be the end of that battle. It's like, but for him personally, he's like, for you personally, I don't think that that's best for you. If you're asking me, tell me for certain what's best for me, I don't think that that's best for you. But the world's going to keep going. People will speak badly about you. You'll feel bad about yourself. But the world's going to keep going. And so I think sometimes we have to take that pressure off that, oh, if I'm holding the fate of the world in my hands, it's like, no, you're not. All we're doing is holding our own fates in our hands. Not the whole world, just ourselves. And that's all that we can really be responsible for and accountable for. And I think sometimes we've put it on our shoulders. We must fix this place. But what if there is no fix? What if there isn't the apology that you think you're supposed to get? What then? Do we find a way to be able to continue on as functioning humans? Because that's what's best for us. It's like that, that holding on to resentment and anger and all that stuff. It's not actually punishing anybody else. Holding on to the guilt is not punishing anybody else. And sometimes the people that are around you and closest to you, the ones who should be paying attention, have no idea that this is happening to you at all. So we have to be responsible for upholding ourselves. And I really like the fact that this entire Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is like, the world's going to keep going because I'm maintaining that. That's my job. Your job is to see to you. And it's kind of nice to once in a while put down that burden. This world is not yours to fix. And as a person who definitely gets that heaviness, that compassion fatigue, I get it real fast. And it can feel overwhelming, and it can feel like you are sick to your stomach every day. But the world is not yours to fix completely, because none of us can do that. It is way above our pay grade. What we can do is we can take care of ourselves, and we can pray like our lives depend on it, because they do. But I think once in a while, we've got to put down that burden. We are not controllers.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Kimberly, you're going to wrap this up for us and give us some takeaways?
Yes, sir. All right, so we're taking away
That's what
that.
happens when you become 38. People start calling you sir.
I call everyone sir. All right, so we're taking away that spiritual life is a work in progress of learning to be intentional. We don't have to shoulder it all ourselves. We can connect with each other. And lastly, Krishna has a sweet spot in his heart for his devotees.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Takeaways, final words.
My final words are something that I want you all to remind me of tomorrow. I want to speak more on it, but just the idea of compassion is an idea that that we've already spoken about in Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna speaks about compassion in the first chapter, and it's very interesting how that word is used. And I guess my takeaway is that, like, sometimes we convince, or I can speak for myself, I convince myself so much of, like, I know what this means and I know how it's supposed to go and I know what needs to be done. And I think so often, if anything, in Bhagavad Gita, there's this question that Krishna is constantly posing to us, is like, well, do you, and Arjuna very humbly is like, actually, no, I actually don't know anything. And so just opening ourselves up to what Krishna has to say, every day remembering, like, actually, maybe I don't know. Actually, maybe how much I've convinced myself of how sure I am, maybe I don't know. Maybe I need to go back to the Gita and see what Krishna says about this. So that's what I'm walking away with today.
My takeaway is kind of piggybacking off of that takeaway. And then when we see what Krishna says, to actually believe him instead of being like, no, it's not. I could like, when, Krishna has spent an entire Bhagavad Gita saying, this place is impermanent and meant for rehabilitation, which means it's going to look very broken. And then we're like, no, it's not. I could fix it. And he's like, I made it broken. Like, no, you didn't. I could fix that. Like, let me try. And he's like, okay, but I made it, like, it's purposefully rough. Like, it's not gonna ever look the way you think it should look. Like, it's not gonna be the beautiful thing that you think, because I want you to come back to like, this is just a reflection. It's not the real thing. I'm like, it's totally real. I can touch it. Watch. So I wanna remind myself to go and look at what Krishna says and then believe him when he says it, instead of, like, believing myself, like, I could make it work. I could fix the thing, Krishna. And he's like, you could fix the thing that I made like this? Yes. So I want to remind myself to maybe pay more attention, not so stubbornly convincing God that I could do it better.
The closing word is just to keep spending time with you guys. I get all the good reminders, all the things that I think I know, but I don't really know. Because I just kind of, like, I can repeat it or I can say it, but, like, to actually live by it, it's a totally another story. So thank you for those reminders so much, and thank you for being here with us, and thank you for being here with me and for you. And we love you guys all so much, and we really, really hope that you guys have a wonderful, wonderful day wherever you're at. We look forward to seeing you next time. If you like something that you heard, share with a friend, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Bye bye, everybody.